there a lot of the content won't be, I think, new for a lot of us, but I just kind of summarized how we should look at that in worldly sense, because that's kind of some of the basics that we all live with, and comparing that to what the Bible says, which we just read. So when we look at debt, it's interesting because the definition actually says that it's the state of being in debt. So it's not just simply, a loan out there. It's this um, probably kind of state of mind and emotionally ties where people are often about debt. And so, based on a study in America, I think it was 2015, they did a study of American people talking about, what's the primary reason for their stress, and um, it's obviously finances. And I think 77% of those participants were saying it causes a lot of anxiety. And so, if you think about money, obviously there's, various reasons why we would be stressed about money, but debt oftentimes is kind of the biggest factor because, you're tied to borrow this, pay back the money that you've been borrowing. And so if we look at the American consumer debt, um, right now it's on a growing trend, obviously, as you see here, from 2003 to 2000. I think as of 2020, it went up to about 14 trillion dollars of consumer debt. And so we're talking about personal debt, mortgages, credit cards, student loans. And what's actually interesting is that I think between 2008 and 2020, um, growth of debt was 168%, whereas income only increased by 48%. So, obviously, if income was growing in the same trend, it made sense for debt to increase as well. But that's certainly not the case. So it's kind of a scary reality there. And so this, just want to go back to looking at kind of how debt is made up, looking back at the basics. We look at the principal balance, right, which is the amount that you actually borrowed, and then obviously the part about debt that we always need to keep in mind is the interest rate, which is the cost of borrowing that money. Um, and then terms could be the length of time, could be short term, long, up to 30 years for mortgages, and then there could or could not be a collateral. So if we look at the types of loans, these terms would change depending on what type of loan is out there. So mortgages very commonly, it's secured by the house, and 30-year fixed loans is pretty common. The mortgage will be the longest type of debt out there for anybody. And then it'll also have the lowest interest rate because it's securitized. So as opposed to that, if we look at some of these other types of income, credit cards, I'm sure a lot of us have been exposed to, those are based on variable rates. So those could go up. I think I've seen like 15% up to 25% even, right? So that's significantly higher. It's not collateralized, so that's usually why the rate is a lot higher. Same with personal loans, and then student loans also could be. Those would tend to be on the lower interest rates, but still higher than mortgages, and usually for a term of I think 5 to 10 years is what I've seen for student loans. And so, you know, I think we've all been exposed to all these types of loans, but when we look at debt, we need to look at, you know, what is good debt versus bad debt, because it's kind of inevitable for us to be in debt, I think, as we start out financially. And so when we look at good debt, it says that it should allow you to increase your wealth and to generate some kind of value out of that. Whereas bad debt is, it does not help you increase wealth. So the asset part of your balance sheet. Instead, it's more like what they call like consumption. So food, clothing, you know, things that probably won't last that long, would be considered in that category. So if we go back to, you know, when we look at these types of debt, oftentimes, I think out of all of these, what most people consider, you know, a good debt out of this would be mortgages, and to some extent student loans, right? So obviously for the house, as much as you pay off the loan, you're kind of building wealth on the house side, what we call equity on the house, as opposed to student loans. You know, it's riskier, but you are building value in terms of, you know, getting a degree for a job in the future. So that's some of the ways that the world would consider good and bad debt. Now the problem is, you know, when we look at credit cards and here, which we would consider in the bad debt category, because you're not often the minimum, or credit cards create kind of like this image where you can make a minimum payment. You don't have to pay off the full amount that you've borrowed, which is entirely false. And a lot of people kind of fall into that trap. So if you look at this chart on the left here, the biggest age range from 25 to 34, their average credit card debt is $10,000, right? And so if that was on like a different type of loan, it might not be as concerning, but being on a credit card, you know, is really something that is concerning. It's showing the a bad habit of that age, obviously. And then, you know, while student loans, we do kind of put in the category of maybe good debt. It's a little difficult to say it's clearly just good debt, because it's not, you can't foreclose on, you can't file bankruptcy on a student loan. So you have to pay it off. There's no way you can say, oh, I'm sorry, like I'm in financial difficulty. And so that way people, you know, the creditors are giving you this debt with no like collateral or way to really pay back, except, you know, staying on your credit report. So if we look at the just how student debt overall has increased over the years, we're just looking at 131% here, as opposed to these other types of loans. So it's just kind of, I think, a trend that we need to realize that may be a problem for, you know, current and future generation as they consider going into college. And then this, I was just kind of looking at like how, you know, you should look at credit card debt. And so just comparing or not comparing, looking at a $5,000 credit card balance. Oftentimes, what the minimum payment will be very small percent of that, so under $5 here, and interest rate is 13.24%. So this is just a scenario. Now, a lot of people, for whatever out of habit or just, I think a lot of people think, oh, I'll just do it for this month, and then next month I'll make sure, I'll pay off this debt in a consistent manner. Doesn't always happen that way. So if we just look at this, if you pay only the minimum payment, you pay off the balance in 15 years, and you're going to pay a total of $9,450, right? As opposed to paying $170, which is just a little bit more in principle. You'll pay it off in 3 years, and that'll be you're paying a total of $6,105. So it kind of shows, obviously how much it's worth to make those principal payments, however small it is, which goes into like seeing that as kind of like a making that as a habit, right, as a financial system for yourself. Now, if we look at kind of how the rich, so still looking at how the world looks at that, so one of the key things about the rich or the wealthy is that having debt is part of a strategy. It's part of a plan. So often they'll have budgets when people start off, and also they're using it in a way to build wealth. Like we're looking at the good types of debt, as opposed to actually just needing it, right? So they have a choice. A lot of clients that I see at the bank, often a mortgage will be the only debt that they have, or they have no debt, and we work with them to create mortgage to strategize with them, because what they essentially do is they would borrow the money, the mortgage, and like I said, that has the lowest interest rate, longest term, and what they do is they invest that money into investment stocks, whatever that the banker can work with, and they making sure that obviously the rate of return that they get from the investments are a lot higher than the rate that you pay on the mortgage. And what happens is that you're creating the income there, but also there's actually a tax benefit to doing that. So I put an example here. Didn't want to go into too much detail, but basically the thing about taxes is that for the wealthy, they also have to consider the tax that they have to pay on their investment income. So whatever income that they generate from their investments, they have to pay tax on those too. And so the way we have set up the mortgage proceeds to be invested, they are able to take whatever interest payment they're making on the mortgage off of the income that they make on the investment. And so if you see here, they're only taxed on the difference. So the interest, let's just, as an example, on a mortgage, they pay, let's say, $40,000 of interest in a year. For investments, they earn $60,000, and then they're only taxed on the $20,000. They're able to subtract the mortgage interest from the investment interest. So that's, it's, if we go into tax code, there's so many, ways that obviously the wealthy are able to find ways to save, but this is definitely one of them. So, the key is that they're finding ways to not only generate wealth, but also it's part of a strategy. Okay, so they have a plan. So if we go into what the Bible says, and I kind of borrowed a lot of stuff from the lecture today. But, the key statement about debt in the Bible is really about this Proverbs 22:6-7. Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he is not to depart from it. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. And so, majority of the people out there will have debt, but it becomes kind of, and talking from experience, it becomes kind of like it holds you back on various things. I think mentally, emotionally, but it if we look at debt in the correct way, obviously it shouldn't feel that way. It shouldn't feel like you're being enslaved. And so, the problem is, as the second verse is saying, when we're indebted, it oppresses the poor and needy, commits robbery, does not restore the pledge, lifts up his eyes to the idols, commits abomination. Actually, I think that was, well, so instead of that, depending on being enslaved to debt, what the Bible says is that we need to be financially independent. And so instead of, we look to our diligence, working, and patience to see that the fruits of what we sow and fruits of our labor. And ultimately, we're being diligent and devoting in order to see God's kingdom, right, and receive His blessing. And so I found this picture kind of interestingly on the site, Google, and it says that when that mustard seed is planted, it will grow to become this tree, and that is what we have received within the gospel. So we're not only talking about getting out of debt and becoming financially wealthy, but we're talking about eventually being able to lend to many nations, right, and to be able to be a blessing for all, and see that overflowing financial wealth. And the Bible does also talk about how we should see, how lenders should look at borrowers. And, there's a lot of, what do you call it? So it says, don't charge your brother interest. It says you can release, in 7 years, you should release all the debt that you hold for other, your neighbors, your brothers. And I think that ultimately, when we think about, when people have wealth to be able to lend to other people, at the end of the day, it's God's blessing on them. And so I think, when we think of each other, especially, if we talk about the Israelites, right, to each other, it's part of their community where they share wealth together in that way. And even when I've always learned about when you borrow money to other people, lend money to other people, you should be able to live without it. Like, in your heart, you should be able to give it to them and not expect anything in return, even though if it institutionally you should receive it, kind of when you're educating your children, kind of thing. But I think it's the same way where we consider our debt to God, right? So we can never repay that debt, But just as God forgave us for this debt that we can never pay back, kind of have some of that heart when we're looking at finances as well. Um, so the last piece I was actually going to um, just so okay, sorry about that. Ultimately, I think that you know debt isn't supposed to be anything that prevents us from or being a hindrance for us to in our relationship with God. I think oftentimes people think that oh it's separate, but obviously if when people are stressed or because of debt or it causes problems between people because sadly it does come up in church settings where people lend money and people don't pay back and stuff. um, in those situations, right, uh, it it's not meant to be a hindrance for us to come before God. um, and so we can't shouldn't be enslaved to debtors, creditors, or even people in this world, but ultimately that we confirm our identity within Christ, of who we are, and as conquerors of um, the true master of our finances is God. So we live as stewards to Him, and to be truly, I think. Uh, I don't know. I'm still kind of meditating about the word independence, but I think that you know part of that also does include being independent from the world, right? If you think about how the Jewish people conquered finances in this world, they they didn't have a lot of the benefits that we have now, right? Um, they didn't have credit cards, they didn't have mortgages. In fact, they weren't able to own real estate, and yet they were able to really take control of finances now. So God definitely uh, has called us as business people to be conquerors as well, and so I think it's um, a matter of us kind of seeing correctly what debt is, as well as every other part of finances, but ultimately to depend on God is what I've concluded.